All right, I see lots of people joining us today, so we're excited to have this conversation kick off. Thank you for logging in and joining us for our, I believe, sixth webinar of the 2023 HealthLinks webinar series on women's health and well-being, strategies for the modern workplace. I'm very excited to have this conversation and dialogue with fellow esteemed colleagues today. A few things to note. My name is David Shapiro, and I am the Senior Manager of Programs and Partnerships. I manage HealthLinks, our public health outreach program at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment. I am a white male. Today, I am wearing a light purple shirt with a gray vest, glasses. My face is shaven, and I have brown, short, curly hair. I'm joining you from our offices on the Anschutz, University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora, Colorado. And my Zoom background today is the HealthLinks logo, which is sort of a interlinked circles in a gray and black background. HealthLinks is a public health outreach program. As I mentioned, we're at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment, one of 10 centers of excellence for total worker health funded by the CDC and NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. We always like to go over a few webinar housekeeping items. The first thing is use the chat to tell us where you're from. We have usually participants from almost all 50 states, as well as over the past year, we've had over 15 countries internationally join us on our webinar series. So if you want to use the chat function now to say hello and tell us where you're joining us from, we'd appreciate knowing. That being said, we'll use chat for any technology or technical issues, but if you have specific questions for our panelists and presenters today, we ask you to put those in the Q&A section of the Zoom toolbar. That way, if a fellow participant has the same question of you, they can use the thumbs up arrow to move your question up the ranking system, and they don't have to retype it. All participants are kept on mute throughout the duration of the presentation. And closed captioning is available for those of you that need it through the Zoom toolbar as well. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up recording in the next 48 hours or so. And there is a survey to be completed upon exiting today's webinar. It's important for those of you that want to claim continuing education credits, whether that be CHES or SHRM, that you complete the survey at the end of today's webinar. We always start also with a land acknowledgement. So as we gather in this virtual space, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. Acknowledging that we live in the homelands of Indigenous peoples recognizes the original stewards of these lands and their legacies. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to the fields of medicine, mathematics, government and military service, arts, literature, engineering, and more. We also recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have developed in relationship to their lands. We recognize and affirm the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands and the many Indigenous people who thrive in this place alive and strong. We also acknowledge the painful history of ill treatment and forced removal that has had profoundly negative impact on Native nations. We respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. We honor them and thank the Indigenous ancestors of this place. The University of Colorado pledges to provide educational opportunities for Native students, faculty, and staff, and advance our mission to understand the history and contemporary lives of Native peoples. For today, we are again talking about women's health and well-being and the relationship to work and how work impacts women's health and well-being. A brief review of our agenda. We're going to have a brief presentation from our keynote presenter, as well as a discussion with well-known speakers and researchers in this space. And we'll have some time at the end of the hour for a Q&A session with all of the speakers as well. Just one note, we never get to all of the questions that you all have. So while we appreciate you putting them in the Q&A, know that that voting feature will help us to navigate the Q&A. And if there are specific questions for speakers, we may be able to follow up on them as well. But we don't ever get to all of the questions. But thank you for engaging with us on both chat and through Q&A. With that, I'd like to introduce all 3 of our speakers for today's webinar. I'm going to start with Dr. Lily Tenney. Dr. Tenney is the Associate Director for Outreach and Programs at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment, and an Assistant Professor at the Colorado School of Public Health, where she teaches graduate courses in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health. Dr. Tenney's work focuses on implementation science. She has over 10 years of experience in dissemination and implementation, program planning, leadership, and strategic partnerships, including directing public health programs focused on promoting worker health and well-being. She speaks nationally on the role employers and work environments play in creating a healthier workforce, and is passionate about integrating total worker health with business sustainability, helping develop impact goals and planning for work, health, and corporate social responsibility. Dr. Tenney is the co-founder and director of HealthLinks, our program, and as a mother of two, she prioritizes finding ways to support working parents. Thank you, Dr. Tenney, for keynoting our presentation today. We're also joined by Priyanka Dwivedi. Priyanka is an assistant professor of management at the Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Dr. Dwivedi's research focuses on strategic leadership and corporate governance issues in organizations. She's especially interested in examining the social, psychological, and organizational factors that contribute to the success of women leaders, such as executives and CEOs. And her research has been published in the Academy of Management Journal and the Journal of Applied Psychology. Dr. Dwivedi teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in strategic management. She received her PhD in management and organization from the Pennsylvania State University, and before pursuing her doctorate, she earned an MBA from the Smeal College of Business at Pennsylvania State University and a master's in psychology from the University of Delhi, India. Thank you, Priyanka, for joining us as well. And we also have Kate Johnson. Kate Johnson is Director and Head of Global Sports and Entertainment Marketing Partnerships, Content and Media at Google, where she leads building the company's strategic approach to sports and entertainment partnerships. Formerly Vice President of Global Sponsorship Marketing at Visa, during her 7-year tenure, Kate oversaw Visa's global partnership portfolio, including the company's 30-year partnership with the IOC, FIFA, and the NFL. In 2017, Johnson was named by Adweek as one of the 35 most powerful women in sport. She won the 2017 Sports Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award and the 2017 Leaders Under 40 Award. Johnson, a former professional rower, competed at the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, Greece, where she and her teammates won a silver medal. She is a 2002 world champion and Olympic and world record holder. A graduate of the University of Michigan, Johnson is a 3-time first-team All-American and was inducted into the University of Michigan Hall of Honor in 2016. Such an esteemed panel, and I'm so excited to hear from all of you. With that, Dr. Tenney, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everyone. It's so exciting to see so many of you here. Obviously, a topic that is of interest and one that's near and dear to my heart as well. So I've invited Kate and Priyanka here today to engage in a dialogue mostly, and a conversation on this topic about women's health and work. And how they intersect and really what it means for employers today. I know that many of you joining here today are representing companies and organizations of all shapes and sizes. And one of the goals that I have is at the end of the quick hour, which I know will fly by, for you to walk away with some new thoughts and ideas and solutions to bring back into your workplaces about how to support and empower women in the workplace. So we're going to touch on a lot of different themes, and I wanted to get started with just some general context on the topic and what we're here to address, considering the unique issues facing women in the workplace today. What we know is that work is essential to women's economic security, social equality, and a robust and sustainable economy for all. And it's made up of a lot of pieces, right? This is complex. When we're talking about women, when we're talking about health, and when we're talking about women in work today, we hit on a lot of different areas of well-being. And this rainbow of colors shows you some of the most important considerations that impact the whole health of what makes up our health. There's been a lot of research, and this research in our field of total worker health really cuts across tens and tens of disciplines that have been researched in business and psychology, in occupational health and safety, and some of what we know and what has been researched is that there are life stages of hormonal impact that have been associated with greater absences and longer durations of leave due to hormonal impact, due to pregnancy and reproduction, and due to chronic diseases and complex health disorders that disproportionately affect women. Women are made differently than men. They're more vulnerable in certain aspects. And so why are these things compromising a women's ability in the workplace? There's a range of reasons that affect our physical and our cognitive ability, depending on some of the many experiences of women in their lifetime and how that relates to health. Let's just take one example. Women experiencing menopausal symptoms such as hot flashes, poor concentration, poor memory, sleep disorders, and tiredness and feeling depressed. This can affect workability negatively. Just one study showed that 3/4 of menopausal women with symptoms reported serious problems in meeting the demands of their work. That's 75% of these women experiencing menopausal symptoms. Pregnancy and reproductive health. We've seen this. This has been in the headlines over the last 5 years, very controversial and political. And there's a lot that is being considered as far as what employers can do to support reproductive health. Chronic disease affects women differently than men. This cuts across some of the rates of cancer, the prevalence of cancer that we see, the prevalence of chronic illness, including chronic pain in the workplace. We have higher rates of violence and harassment. In general, women actually have lower rates of work-related injuries and illnesses, but higher rates of incidence across stress levels. They're 2 times higher for women compared to men. We know that stress is linked to heart disease, depression, and burnout. And with breast cancer, we're seeing over 230,000 new cases of breast cancer each year. So we have significant health and safety issues facing women. At the center of this, what I'm really going to discuss today with our panelists is this idea that women can have it all. You see this across the media. This is just one quote that was published in the Atlantic by the author Anne Marie Slaughter, who I feel phrases it very accurately, that she says, "I still strongly believe that women can have it all and that men can too. I believe that we can have it all at the same time, but not today, not with the way Americans' economy and society are currently structured. My experiences over the past 3 years have forced me to confront a number of uncomfortable facts that need to be widely acknowledged and quickly changed." Depending on what data you're looking at, we know that women are 5 to 8 times more likely than men to have their employment affected by caregiver responsibilities. So this is one report that came out in just last year, showing the number between men and women and the percentages of the population reporting caregiving impact on employment by gender and age. So you can see that the groups that are most affected are those women aged 25 to 54 with minor children, and that's with children younger than 18 years of age at home. We also have strong data showing that it's harder to advance when women in the workplace. And this is specific for working mothers and career advancement, and also women with other caregiving responsibilities, taking care of elder parents, taking care of friends. Just the burden of caregiving has an impact of women to advance in the workplace. And then we had the unfortunate opportunity to see the impact that COVID played in exacerbating these trends. We saw a huge recession happen between 2020 and 2022 when millions of women left the workforce, accounting for 63% of jobs lost during the pandemic. This had tremendous impact on the diversity that we've worked so hard towards creating in different workplaces. We lost talent, we lost productivity, and we saw a spotlight shine on the major issues of what tensions exist between work and families that have been there, but it really put a microscope on this. And working parents, both men and women, in any job where they could keep working, started to realize some of the silver linings around flexible work arrangements, around having bosses that were empathetic and that they could talk about what stresses they were experiencing in both work and home. We also started to see who was struggling the most with some of the caregiving burdens and some of the stress, depression, and mental health issues that women were impacted with during this time. So what COVID taught us really brought to light a lot of the juggling act that women who are caregivers and who are also not caregivers were experiencing during the time of COVID, and also the return to work. And those with lived experiences really were starting to write and to start to have a voice in the various ways that women were combining careers and combining family in a way where it forced us to think about what employers could be doing better, and what they could be doing today to better support women through work and through advancement and to address some of these challenges. So with that context, I am really excited to invite Kate and Priyanka back to the stage here to be able to start our conversation and start to bring to light some of the examples, some of the stories related to some of these unique issues women face at work. And I'd like to start with you, Kate, if I could. Hi, it's good to see you.
Hi.
In this context.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, Kate, you have an amazing story. You're an Olympian turned successful career woman. You've worked in a number of different workplace settings and different job roles. You were then diagnosed with cancer. And I'm wondering if you can start by sharing how your cancer diagnosis and survivorship brought to light for you what women's health and work have to do with what we're talking about today.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be able to share my story with you all. Sadly, I have come to realize that my story is not unique, in the sense of what I experienced, especially during COVID. At the start of 2020, I began a new job. And it was a big job. It was kind of that stage of my career where I was really stretching and leaping. I was kind of moving towards a bit of a reinvention in terms of my executive career. And I'd been at Google for 2 months prior to the pandemic. So not only was I navigating how to work within a completely new corporate environment from home, but then, we were dealing with, as all of us were, like the added responsibilities of now having to homeschool kids, having to, and my husband, I should just share, is a physician, and he did, his experience of the pandemic was very different to mine. He went to work every day. So there was not a lot of shared responsibility in terms of like the home management. And, I was at a company where I was trying to prove myself. So, add to that that by the end of my first year at Google, I actually first, and it's interesting, first experienced shingles. And when I met with my dermatologist, she was like, well, this is an absolute indicator of stress. Shingles was on the rise during the pandemic for a lot of office workers who were dealing with all these, added home life responsibilities while working. And then fast forward 2 months later, I was about a year and a bit into my job at Google, and I came home from a run. I just received, I was kind of 3 weeks out from my first vaccine, and I had a painful lump in my armpit. And I had my husband feel this. He went sheet white when he felt what was a large mass in my armpit. And he said, look, that's not a normal lymph node. You need to go get that checked out. It took me a while. I'm an Olympic athlete. I was the last person that thought cancer was going to impact me. I just come home from a run when I found this mass, and then I'd also read that the vaccine was causing swollen lymph nodes and all the rest. What I hadn't been doing was doing regular breast exams, and so I'd missed the two very obvious mass in my breast. So when I went to my gynecologist, and she, had kind of said, we don't like to find lymph nodes alongside mass. I quickly went into all the diagnostic tests and all the rest, and it turned out I had stage 3 advanced metastatic breast cancer, which was, a massive shock to all of us. And so now I'm having to navigate, career and kind of this whole new foreign language of cancer, which is, a peach, I'd never wanted to get, indoctrinated into how to speak that language, but was having to learn on my feet. And I would say that a lot of our world kind of ground to a halt at that moment. And, I can go on, Lily, you tell me how much more you want me to share, but I would say, I guess I just leave you with, I had to quickly, educate myself on, okay, what are my leave opportunities? Interestingly, I'd set a call with, Google has like a lot of employee relation groups, and I joined a cancer employee relations group just because I was like, well, what do? You're diagnosed with, a potentially life-threatening disease. Like, what are my options? And I really leaned on kind of the support of my colleagues to navigate that. And the first thing as a woman was actually just even embracing the idea that I could take time off. It's amazing to me that actually wasn't the first thing that I thought of. And I think a lot of that was just because, I was still in this place of trying to prove myself, really trying to earn my my stripes at Google. And yeah, so it was a complex moment.
Well, we're going to come back to some of that experience you had with coworker support, supervisor support. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience, and especially how new this is. I mean, I'm sure you're still going through this every single day. So thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Priyanka, you also were impacted by COVID personally. And professionally. I'm wondering if you can share your story about that and how that highlights this example of work and family and productivity, and even the intersection of your research between business and psychology.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lily. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here. It's humbling to be here actually amongst all these women, and to hear Kate's story is so inspirational. So thank you, Kate, for sharing that with us and giving us strength. I don't know if Lily did this or if there was a strategy behind it, or if this was pure coincidence, but as it happens, my husband is also a physician, and he was actually managing the COVID ICU at the College Station, local College Station hospital here in Texas. So I could relate to a lot of what Kate was saying about not having the spousal support, and really sharing the majority of the burden that pandemic brought on to women. I'm a mother of 2 and an immigrant. My older one was being homeschooled, and interestingly enough, and this was not planned at all, but I happened to be pregnant and gave birth right in the middle, in the peak of COVID, May 2020, with a husband who was not really available because he was managing COVID patients at that time. So Lily, when you started off the webinar talking about the different ways in which a women's health is impacted, and the impact on work and how work can impact that health. I think I really lived that during those months, during that phase in my life. To say that it was difficult would be an understatement. I had never imagined to be challenged the way life challenged me during that time. Being an immigrant in this country, I do not have family around. And if you can remember, the entire world had gone into a lockdown. So none of my family and friends could really be there as a support system when I was giving birth alone in the hospital. So those were challenging times, but they also gave me perspective into my own research on women in leadership roles. And the kind of unique challenges that confront women. And really, through my interviews with women in executive roles, I've come to admire the strength that women show at the workplace. And I think organizations going forward need to acknowledge that and provide better support in many ways. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Priyanka. You highlight some of the challenges around the pull, the tensions we experience, and also just how society has changed at large, right? Even when we saw people starting to return to work, and we're talking about those that had what the privilege was to be able to keep working during the pandemic, with employers that created accommodations, flexibilities, and coming back to the question of can women and men have it all? What is most closely associated with having it all is having the right job. And the right job can include an employer, a workplace, the coworkers, the culture that supports what the individual need is, which is in constant flux throughout our careers, throughout our lifetimes. So I want to shift now back to the role that the employer can play in addressing some of these unique challenges. And one of the other ones that I hadn't mentioned, that you brought up, Priyanka, are some of the stereotypes, right? Some of the things that a women experience when trying to manage the tensions of work and family and their own health. And in your case, Kate, I'm wondering, Kate, if I can start by asking you what some of examples that you have found to be most associated with your own well-being at Google in your previous careers, and what has led to that culture of belonging and well-being that you attribute your resilience to keep going in treatment.
First, I love that you use the word resilience, Lily. I, as an Olympic athlete, I chose a word actually in my Olympic year, which was relentless. And this is at a time when I was trying, I actually had broken my 8th rib for the 8th time. It was looking like a long shot to make the Olympic team. And I kind of had to pull myself out of a hole. So I chose this word relentless to kind of define how I wanted to make the Olympic team. I ended up using a lot of the same psychology. And this is where I will tell you, I felt so fortunate to be an elite athlete going through breast cancer, because I really did tap into a lot of my athletic background to navigate that. And the thing that kind of constantly stuck with me as I went on my journey was, meeting these other women in the chemotherapy centers and, in the radiation waiting room and all the rest. Like you become friends with these other patients, and realizing just how much of a leg up I had because I had come up through sport in terms of my own resilience in life. And ironically, I actually had chosen the word resilience to define how I wanted my breast cancer journey to go. I mean, I actually chose the word before I even met with my healthcare team. And in my meeting, when I was interviewing different healthcare teams, the doctor that I really wanted actually used the word resilience when kind of talking to me and describing me. And that's how I ended up choosing her to be my physician.
Made in heaven. Yeah.
It was a match made in heaven. But I will tell you, like I said, kind of when I started, the journey that I had to go on with Google, right? New employer for the most part. I acknowledged I will tell you, the stickiness of Google came with that cancer diagnosis. Like people came out of the woodwork to support me, but also the understanding of how critical benefits are. in terms of choosing employers. I mean, you choose these, you know, it's open enrollment right now, so it's obviously a key time to be talking about this. But, you know, when you're going through open enrollment, you're thinking about these things, you know, and you're not actually necessarily always thinking about the worst case scenario. And I don't think I'll ever be in a situation where I go through open enrollment and don't think through what the worst case scenario could be while choosing the benefits that I'm going to, you know, select. Google, like I said, there was an ERG group. I think the first thing I got to was just an understanding of how to, and I was thankful that I lived in California at the time too, where disability around healthcare was matched from an employer perspective. And so I was able to kind of cobble together PTO, paid disability, and then sick leave into what effectively became a 6-month leave of absence. And, you know, I found, and I think people choose to go on their own journey when they go through cancer, but it helped me to actually talk about it, because the more I could enroll my colleagues, my boss, leadership at Google in the journey that I was going on, the more transparent I could be about that, the more support I had, frankly. I mean, I can't imagine having gone through that without sharing what I was going through. I think that would have been far more isolating, and I think I would have, I don't know that I know it can be scary to share these things with employers, absolutely. But at the same time, I fundamentally believe we're all human, and cancer now sadly is, you know, at a place in our world where, you know, what is it, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 people are going to be touched by this in some way, shape, or form. So the odds of the coworkers you share space with having been touched by cancer are significant. And I think in that place, I was able to navigate, you know, kind of all the benefits that I took advantage of. And I'll share this with you guys. We've transformed our life since cancer. You know, another part of that is in the life stages that you kind of said at the outset of your presentation, Lily. Like, you know, now I'm in medically induced menopause as a 43-year-old woman. You know, and that absolutely affects, you know, I've noticed as I've like gone through this like accelerated menopause experience, like how it's affecting memory, how it's, you know, just hot flashes in the center of a meeting room. These things that, like, you know, I'd love for a man to stand in my shoes and experience on any given day while they're delivering like a major executive presentation and see how it goes. Like that's kind of the reality of women in general as we navigate these life stages. And I do think the 6-month leave of absence that I took for my health compared to the 4 months leave of absence that I took for maternity leave were very different in terms of how I thought about like coming back to the workforce and regrounding myself in what I needed to be successful at work, having navigated what I did.
That's amazing. It's a really good segue into one of the areas of research that you work on, Priyanka, which is psychological safety. And the vulnerability that you just described, Kate, to be able to share, you know, to really talk with people in a way that is comfortable and creates the doors to open around these conversations, I think is really important, because you highlighted a couple of things. The first is that this is something that impacts all women, not just women with children. And I think that's important to this conversation. It also relates to how this translates to women across all levels of the organization. And I want, Priyanka, you to talk a little bit more about that element of psychological safety and what we're seeing organizations do, what CEOs can do to be able to really enhance this element in the workplace, and how these strategies can translate across different types of organizations. You know, Google, gold standard, right? So can you speak to psychological safety and really how important that is?
Sure. Thank you, Lily. So just to begin with, you know, just a basic understanding of what psychological safety means, and especially as it relates to women. Psychological safety is this idea that we can bring our full selves to the workplace, right? We can feel safe to voice our ideas, bring our authentic selves. If we have concerns, you know, we can raise and experiences that we want to bring to the table. We don't fear bringing those ideas out in the open. And a lot of what Kate talked about spoke to this idea of psychological safety. Do I feel safe to be vulnerable at work with a few trusted people? And in some of my research, and again, my research focuses largely on women executives. So women in CEO roles, women who are advancing towards senior management positions, but it really translates to women across the organization. And in some of my research, I've examined the role that leaders and male allies play in creating a sense of psychological safety for women. So my research examined what happens when CEOs engage in what I call as diversity valuing behavior, right? Through your behavior, you are making it clear that you value women's contribution to work and to the organization. So when women observe their leaders and their CEOs to engage in such behavior, which suggests that they value women's contributions to work, women feel more psychologically safe at work. And that in the context of female executives in large firms in the US, I found seems to reduce women's exit from organizations. So it reduces turnover. And I know, Lily, you talked about, how the pandemic exacerbated talent loss, right? Loss of diversity and talent, especially for women, women who are in the lower levels of the organization. So really psychological safety can play a huge role in stemming some of that loss of talent and diversity across levels. And again, my research was focused on executives, but the insights that we gain from that research translate across levels, even women at the lower levels in their entry-level positions. So I cannot stress enough the role that leaders and male allies play in creating that environment where women can bring their experience, their lived experiences, their authentic selves, their ideas and creativity to the table without fearing of penalties and backlash and negative repercussions at work.
Would you agree, Kate? Have you seen this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because where I felt myself. So first of all, it was actually a male ally that said to me, "Why do you think you need to keep working while you're navigating cancer treatment?" So just already having a male cancer ally share with me, "Look, I took time off. This is how it manifested for me." And then also frankly remembering this is, I think I find myself at a stage in my career too, where I was very aware of myself as a role model. Because I am a senior executive woman at Google. I have, there's a large team of very vocal women, single, LGBTQ, all the rest that I know that I am modeling behavior for when it comes to health and well-being. I think because I also, I speak pretty openly. I do, we have things called Google Talks where I talk about like my Olympic journey and as an example. And so sharing these things as a strong female leader, like, hey, when I went through a really life-changing situation, that could be a lot of things. That could be taking, and we saw a lot of women and men take carers leave during the pandemic. I think creating psychological safety that you can step out of the workforce to take care, because you are not going to be a great employee if you're not taking care of the fundamental things that make you you, whether that be your home life, your health. I mean, all of that factors into health and well-being. And so I was actually, right before I went out on my health leave, I even hosted a transparent, and I should say I was like 3 months into chemo. So I'd already lost my hair when I hosted a Google Talk just to share with people what I was doing and the journey that I was going on and why I was taking time off to take care of myself. And the questions that I got from a lot of our younger employees, their fear around taking time off, their fear around like missing a step in their career. It was an interesting one for me. And I think it brings back a point where, I have a lot of male employees too that I encourage, like, hey, when you're given paternity leave, take it, because women's success in the workplace when they take leaves of absence is only matched and supported when men take that time off too, to support their own health and well-being, whether that be carers leave, whether that be paternity leave, whether that be, whatever it is. And that is something I think Google's doing really well. Now, I acknowledge not every company can, offer like the extensive leaves that like a company like Google can, but I do think creating psychological safety to put the employee first is so important. And I say this all the time, like, until men experience what it's like to leave the workforce for a period of time and then come back and experience how to navigate their career, promotions they might have been overlooked for, salary and comp, equity increases because of time off. Like until that experience some form of equity, it's it'll always be imbalanced.
If I
It's so true. Go ahead, Priyanka.
Sorry, Lily. I think that's Kate. You've made such an excellent point here because that's something that we understand from research as well, and that's such a critical point and speaks directly to women's equity in the workplace, whether it is representation, reward systems, and compensation. So some of the emerging research from the field of management suggests that organizations will use work-family conflict as a narrative, to not change things around in many ways, because they position work-family conflict or personal needs as a women's issue, right? So they see it as a women's problem, but we know, and emerging evidence is suggesting that men experience these conflicts in the workplace too. They just silently, bear it, and so they're not as impacted from a career outcome standpoint by these issues as much as women are. And to that extent, something that I know, Lily, you framed it as what can organizations do? And I think a critical point here is that not only that men have to take these flexi work policies, but also organizations have to understand that oftentimes when women alone take these benefits of taking time off from work to deal with their health issues, to take care of family needs, life issues, they get penalized for it, right? So there has to be a wider understanding that there are unintended consequences when women are the only ones taking these flexi work, time out policies to take care of their personal and health needs. So encouraging both men and women to take advantage of these policies goes a long way in creating gender equity at the workplace.
I love that. And I think it's so critical to one of the most common things that we recommend organizations to do around providing comprehensive benefits and leave options is that tipping point between being able to offer it is one thing, being able to have the support system in place, and not only at the manager supervisor level, but across the whole organization to prepare for that leave, and the return from leave is so critical. I always talk about this with my close friends about the stress of taking parental leave, that you spend 6 months preparing for a 3-month leave. And when you come back, it's not until you've actually experienced it, you realize it's not the end of the world. Like it's like you were there yesterday in a lot of ways, but that only happens when you have an organization and a team that is supporting you in that journey. And I think that conversation leads us to a lot of the great questions that are coming in about how this relates back to total worker health and what employers can do. I wanted to share this slide about some of the themes that came up in this conversation around being able to understand what you just said, Priyanka, the value of diversity and equity, and that acknowledgement of understanding the disparities between men and women. And this we didn't even touch on today, really, some of these equity issues and disparities based on types of job, social and economic and cultural factors that put some women at risk more than others. But I want to come back to some of the comprehensive health insurance plan and flexible work arrangements benefits, and just ask one more question before we open it up, which is first to you, Kate. And I'd like you to provide just your top 2 or 3 examples of what Google is doing to support women. And you mentioned some of them around benefits and leadership, but are there other cool things that you've seen in action or even outside of Google that you can share about what employers are doing?
Yeah. It's interesting because, I came from Visa, which was like a 65-year-old company, and then into Google, which is, we just celebrated 25 years. And I think in that I've seen like a shift in terms of corporate mindset around flexible job opportunities. So, for example, one of the things that Google does that I think is really, the onus is on the employee to have initiative to go for this, but we create 20% roles all the time. So, for example, right now, a woman who's in our communications department really wants to expand outside of communications and maybe like grow her professional development into sports marketing. Well, I've created a 20% role for her to come and flex into my org. It means that she's going to have to work 120%, right? She has to meet the obligations of her full-time job while still giving me 20% of her time. But I think the agreement is between, me who's extended a 20% role. I understand that her first and foremost, her job is to do her full-time paid gig first. So anything I can get over and above that is a bonus, but also it's an opportunity for me to try on new talent. And I've actually on my team hired 3 people from these 20% roles because they've shown, a different cognitive ability, a critical thinking that I need on my team, maybe like a penchant towards numbers that I don't have. And I never, that's so much harder to sift through CVs to find. And so, I think that's where like internal mobility as a top priority for companies and being able to create flexible policies to promote internal mobility has been amazing. And then another one that's really interesting is like for things like maternity leaves or paternity leave covers, we always go, rather than going to kind of temporary vendors and contractors, I think especially in times where organizations are being pushed to be really efficient with the existing headcount that they have, we call them bungees. So you can bungee into a role to fill like a 6-month leave, a 4-month leave, whatever that might be, full time. And, you get the permission of your current, boss or team to then go and bungee into that role. But again, the benefit is to the company and covering a leave of absence while also, providing employees with career growth opportunities. And those things, I will tell you, has created like the number one thing that Google has is that people stay for a very long time because the internal mobility is massive. They move across the org, across roles, and it's just incredible for career growth.
Thank you. David, I see jumping back in here. I know we have a lot of questions and 10 minutes. Do we want to, at this point, transition?
Sounds good to me. Thanks, Lily. I just want to mention, as someone who identifies as a male and being able to participate in this conversation, I really have appreciated hearing from you all, and learning more about your perspectives. I know that the caregiving responsibilities in my household, even though I feel like I'm pretty hands-on, generally fall more on the plate of my wife. Even though, like I said, I step up as much as I can. That mental load piece that Lily and I have talked about in the past is something that I just navigate differently. So I want to, there's a few questions that have elevated to the top, one of which speaks to the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation about women. We happen to have all 3 of you as moms with children and as caregivers on the panel today. But the question is specifically like, the issues you're talking about are not specific to heterosexual married women with children. I'm just going to read the question directly from Sarah Hughes. Thank you. These issues also apply to women, including single women, LGBTQ+, women without children. So how can we broaden this conversation to a wider audience? What are the things do we need to consider and reference when we go outside of sort of, but the caregiver role, being a new mom? What are the things, are important to consider for the broad spectrum of individuals that identify as women? I'll start with that one. And maybe I'll start, Priyanka, with you, if you don't mind. And then if anybody else wants to follow up.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that's a really thorough and thoughtful question. And oftentimes when we are living through experiences, we tend to focus on just our experience, right? And we forget that there are other people who may be experiencing the same situation a little differently. And I think that's where the word inclusion really rings a bell for me, because when we talk about diversity, and my research is on diversity, oftentimes we are thinking in terms of representation and numbers and pay gaps and so on and so forth. But inclusion is the term that really needs attention when we think about people who are diverse and have diverse life experiences and maybe experiencing different challenges to the mainstream. And so inclusion, to my mind, is about how, whether the workplace is welcoming to these different experiences and these diverse voices. And so that I think as organizations move forward in thinking about bringing more women to the leadership table, paying women equally, I think we need to keep the idea of inclusion in everyday work life. Every day that the employees are going to work, are they feeling included? Because their lived experiences could be different from, let's say, the leaders or from the majority women who may be working and maybe have children. But there are other individuals who may have different lived experiences. So just stressing and focusing and thinking about inclusion would be really, really important.
Yeah, I'd love
I
to.
would add too.
Go ahead, Kate.
No. Okay. Well, I guess what I would add is, and again, this is, I think it's on us to help create the dialogue around these things. A lot of what we've talked about, sure, are acute health situations, leaves of absence that kind of fit categorically into something. But I do think there's been such progress in the area of mental health and well-being. And just given the mental load that every individual on earth has had to bear during the pandemic, during the constant, barrage of global events that are happening that are affecting all of us in different ways. I think having conversations with employers around mental health too, right? And carving out room for that. And, I think for me, and now I'm talking more as a leader than as someone who's, been through my own leave of absence, I think paying attention to my team who have very different lived experiences, whether or not they are currently, they're Jewish, whether or not they're, in this day and age, in this moment in time, whether or not they are going through their own, just personal gender navigation. Like we have there's a real openness around at Google around these things. And so the conversation is easier to have. I think for companies where that conversation isn't as easy to have, I love required reading. I mean, I recommended books to my male colleagues just so that they did understand the load that, women in general are carrying just by virtue of our gender differently from men. And I think where we can have provided reading and resources available to our colleagues is really important.
All right, we all want a sneak peek at the Kate Johnson recommended reading list, so we'll put that on the radar of books to navigate. So thank you, Kate, for mentioning that. I do want to mention pay equity, and paid leave in general. Oftentimes these larger policy issues get sort of bucketed as a women's issue. I've worked on the paid leave conversation both for the state of Colorado and nationally for the better part of the last decade, and I'm always sort of curious when an executive says to me, oh, that's sort of a women's issue for our company. Pay equity and paid leave are gender neutral, right? They affect all of us. They affect all of our workers. And I think one of the things is for leaders and others to think about is these topics that we're talking about, paid leave, pay equity, they're not a women's specific issue. This is a national issue. It speaks on national economic policy. It speaks to national security. It speaks to so many things about supporting individuals in our life. And the more we can get allies and advocates from all genders to support these initiatives, I think the better. The more we pigeonhole things like paid equity and paid leave as a women specific issue, I think that continues the conversation of that's someone else's domain. And so, one of the things I commit to is to continue to be an ally for those conversations as well. And so, another question that came up that is interesting, and I appreciate all of the questions coming in. There is so much. Is what recommendation would you give to a junior, maybe younger woman who's looking to start a family, or maybe going through a health issue, maybe taking some time off, thinking about taking time off? How would you mentor or support that individual in a conversation with a leader? Let's say agnostic in terms of the company right now. We don't know exactly what the company is, but what advice might you give to a junior professional? Kate, you already touched on this a little bit, but maybe I'll start with you. If you wanted to impart a couple things of wisdom on someone based on your own experience in the workplace, what would you start with?
Honestly, as a leader, I think we have to be very careful as leaders not to make assumptions about other people's lived experiences. I found myself such a listener during the George Floyd massive moment in our society, I ended up leaning on colleagues to help people of color within Google navigate what was a very traumatic moment in our, and not just moment, right? Like a lived experience. And so me as a leader, I think when I have conversations with younger people learning, like trying to figure out how to navigate their career that are dealing with a very different lived experience from me, I always start with kind of like sharing, usually just trying to create room for vulnerability by sharing something about myself that maybe just leaves room for them to kind of enter the conversation as their authentic self. And then rather than always put the onus on them to come up with the solution for me to provide them support, come up with like, hey, I have a few ideas for how I think I can support you right now. First and foremost, your mental and overall health and well-being is critical for me. Here are some of the things that I've used in my tool chest to help me navigate difficult times. Would these things be helpful to you? And then I think they can respond to that with like, yes, no, or like, hey, I was actually thinking about this. But oftentimes it's not too different from when you go through something like being sick. Like the worst thing to ask somebody when they're sick is like, hey, what can I do to help you? Like take the load off of them. Don't have them come up with the idea for how you can help them. Like come to them with ideas, see if those would be helpful to them. They will give you an honest answer and then go from there. But I just think as leaders, like it's so essential that I will admit I have stepped in it many times as a leader where like I've made the assumption, right, erroneously about what somebody else's lived experience might be, which I can't understand because I've only had mine. And so I think just again, like coming from a place of vulnerability into those conversations and then coming with solutions that you're asking for feedback on is a really good place to start.
Terrific. I want to thank Lily, Dr. Tenney, Dr. Dwivedi, and Kate Johnson for the just really important commentary and dialogue today on women's overall health and well-being. We are at the top end of the hour. As I mentioned in the beginning, we never have enough time for all the questions. So thank you for all of the engagement on Zoom with us today. Our final webinar for 2023, the calendar year 2023, is in a month. It's on a topic that we touched on today, which is supporting workers with chronic health conditions. And we have a diverse group of speakers on that as well, based on their subject matter expertise. So we hope you can join us at our next webinar in November, next month. And there is a survey. We know that it's important for so many of you to complete this survey and to claim your continuing education credits. So you should receive, the survey should pop up automatically for you as you log out of today's meeting. That would be for those of you that are on a device that supports that. We will also put the link in the chat for you. And just know also that since you're here today, in the follow-up email, you'll get a link to take the survey as well. It stays open for the next week. So don't panic. You will have an opportunity to complete the survey. And just once again, kudos to you, to Dr. Tenney, Dr. Dwivedi, and to Kate Johnson for the remarkable commentary and dialogue today. Just really appreciate it and appreciate your time and participation with us.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Kate and Priyanka. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.